let's take a look back at the coronavirus.
Right.
Not from China, as we all know. I can't say that. Let's take a look at it. Let's break this down in a couple different areas. One is economic policy, and you say we overreacted. No one's going to hold it against the politician for overreacting for the safety of the populace, especially the electorate when it comes down to voting, right? But so where did we make mistakes along the way? And I don't want to use this conversation as a way to be a partisan weapon against any, because I don't think anyone in politics got this right. I mean,
Nobody got it right.
Other than New Zealand, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, South Korea, maybe Japan. Well, that's because they're closer to China. They've had these outbreaks before, and they've been through it. They were used to it. We weren't used to this, so we're like, oh, why would we wear masks? We've never done this before, or at least not in 100 years. So take a look back and say, if this is an after action review, what does Daniel Gade go forward with in case this happens again?
Well, it's going to happen again. So a couple of key lessons that I think we've learned. One, so in order to protect ourselves better, one of the things we need to do, and we need to do this now, and we need to do it vigorously, and let's get after it. We need to treat our medical infrastructure, our medical supply chain, the same way that we treat the supply chain for other national security critical items. So there's a separate, there's import-export rules around things like night vision goggles and certain kinds of weapons and uranium and things that are critical to our national defense because they're critical. And so what we've seen is that we were overexposed to Chinese pharmaceuticals, Chinese personal protective equipment, a couple of other items. And so the first thing we need to do is provide incentives so that businesses are incentivized to bring that production back to places that won't hold us over a barrel if they get a chance. So places like Canada and Mexico and Israel and the United States of America are places that are always going to be friendly to us. And so we ought to be having that stuff produced here and in those allied countries as soon as possible and as robustly as possible. So that's part of preparing ourselves for the future here. The next part, though, is really interesting, I think, Chris. And if you have left and right or two different poles here, what happened is, there's a needle in between them. And we went, and this one is the advice of medical people, virologists, those sorts of people, epidemiologists. And over here is the advice of economists. And what we did is we went ping, and we went just to their advice. We pinned the needle on their advice. And their advice is always going to be lock yourself in your home, wear a mask, bathe in rubbing alcohol twice a day, whatever, whatever their thing is, that's what they're going to say.
Right.
The problem is that that's not the only consideration. Saving lives is not the only consideration. In fact, a destroyed economy takes lives too. So I read this the other day that a 1% uptick in unemployment rate kills about 30,000 Americans in a year, and it kills them by suicide and increased crime and increased drug use and increased alcohol use and other things associated with that. So 30,000 Americans a year die if you don't take into effect that your economy has to keep thriving. So all of that to say, instead of just listening to the medical professionals, which those people matter, we need to listen to them. We got to listen to both sides, and that's an area that we should have done better. We should have listened to the economists as well as to the virologists.
Okay, very good. What do you think the government's response to this has been optimal? I mean, to me, it's suboptimal. I don't think anyone got it right, and because it's new, and I'm not trying to point fingers, but there has to be a look back and kind of go, yeah, we could do better next time, because people are scared people were afraid to go out of their homes. People were afraid not to have toilet paper, and they bought, they were going crazy on it. I would, given the last couple of weeks, I'd go back to those days in a second. But
yeah. Well, one thing that has been completely suboptimal is the response of our political class. So you saw in the Congress, and I am going to throw a little rock here at my opponent in this race, Mark Warner. You saw them on Capitol Hill use this as an opportunity to imagine a hungry person goes into a grocery store with an empty cart and is just there for a gallon of milk. Well, what happened is Congress should have just gone in with a gallon of milk or a loaf of bread or whatever they were going for, and that is relief, the Paycheck Protection Program, or whatever, whatever form the relief takes.
Right.
But instead, they went in there, and just like a hungry person does with a shopping cart, they loaded it up with a bunch of stuff they didn't really need, right? So the $25 million for the Kennedy Center, the bailout there, is a famous example, but it's not the worst. The worst of all, Chris, this is a huge problem, is the Democrats have decided that it's in their best interests to have state and local governments run by Democrats be bailed out by the federal credit card. So, if you imagine, I mean, it's a trivial example, but if I have 3 children, they're awesome, 18 and twin, almost 12-year-olds. But if one of them someday runs up a credit card tab and I pay it off, then all I've told them is that their actions are of no consequence. In fact, what I should do is let them sort of ride the dragon, whatever that is. They ought to bear the consequences for that. And so the state and local governments, Chicago and California and Illinois writ large, that have overspent for decades on things like public pension programs, guess what? Now their economy is going to have to bear the consequences for that, and that's going to mean relooking those contracts that they've been negotiating for years. And it's not the responsibility of Virginia to pay for California's problems, and that's what Mark Warner says we should do.
He supports that?
No, absolutely, yes.
I have not known that, because especially given his record as, he was considered the fiscal conservative business guy when he was governor. When I served with him, that was sort of his calling card. Hope we didn't lose you there.
Yeah, but potentially as governor he was, and he tried that in the Senate for about the first 2 years. He was part of the Gang of 8 or Gang of 6 or whatever it was. But he has not held up that end of the bargain since then. And he was part of the group that proposed this $1 trillion bailout to the states, and it's states and local governments. It's disgusting. It's not appropriate.
Well, that's a potential issue in this campaign, because Virginians are a fiscally responsible lot and pride ourselves on our fiscal responsibility, and that one will could be an impact in this campaign.